Hello and welcome to the Leap Forward podcast. This is the show where we explore the leaders, ideas, innovations that are shaping the future of work, learning, and human potential. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by someone who has played a significant role in shaping education policy in the UK, and its impact is felt throughout the world, frankly, and continues to influence the sector globally. Lord Jim Knight, Baron Knight of Weymouth. You served as a Minister of State for Schools and Learning, and you've held leadership roles across education and skills. You've invested your time personally and remained deeply involved in how tech and policy and systems can improve outcomes for learners. And somehow you've managed to find time to join us here today. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome and thank you.
It's a real pleasure to be here, and I've been looking forward to having the conversation because I know your expertise too, so hopefully we can fire off something that will work for everyone.
I'm going to do my best. So look, before we dive in, for anyone that's listening who may not know you, that well, how would you describe what you do today and what you've kind of focused on sort of right now?
So I'm a mix, still being in Parliament, in the House of Lords as a legislator, with getting more involved on the ground. I mean, the summary of what I suppose I try to use my convening power and my experience to catalyse good, morally sound outcomes in education. And that comes, yes, through trying to influence legislation and government, but I chair a multi-academy trust of 37 schools, 25,000 learners in some of the most disadvantaged parts of England. So that keeps me grounded in what's happening on the ground and what makes a difference to those that most need it. I advise Nord Anglia, one of the most valuable education businesses in the world, running 90-odd schools globally. I chair the Council of British International Schools, which is a trade association for that sector. So that gives me a bit more of a global reach and understanding. I chair the board at Century Tech, which is a fantastic, now quite well-established AI and education business, using now a mix of traditional AI and some of the newer generative AI. So that keeps me up to date a little with what's going on in that world of the next generation of technology. And then I also chair the board at STEM Learning, which is it's the business that trains science teachers here in the UK. So that keeps me involved in the professional development of the workforce that's crucial to all of this happening and being successful. And that builds on what I did when I was at TES, founding the TES Institute, which is a teacher training institution.
It's incredible. I mean, if you want to, get something done, you ask a busy person. I mean, it's just phenomenal. You've got that really, I think, I'd say pretty much unique, I suppose, in a sense, vantage point right now, because, as you said, that list of things, each of those has got their own individual kind of contribution to kind of the bigger picture, I suppose, in a sense. And whether that's policy making to innovation, systems change and social impact. When you sort of just step back or step up, whatever, and you look at the landscape today, what is sort of most kind of urgent and pressing for you right now?
I think it is that the school systems that I get involved with, particularly here in England, but that I observe around the world, they work pretty well for those that are going to go to academic universities and prosper in academic universities. But they don't work very well for anybody else. And at a sort of macro level, here in the UK, since the banking crash of 2008, our productivity has been stagnant. And that's, in the end, a problem with an education ecosystem that's not functioning well enough. I look at the rise in SEND spend in English schools, and there's a real pressure point, and reflect on how badly we're failing those kids. And there's more and more young people whose differences from the standardised model of a child that we design education for are more pronounced. And there's a there's a real problem with that standardised approach in that it's no longer fit for purpose for the range of different people and the range of different needs that we now understand. That those third, probably, who are particularly failed by the system, they are likely to end up not in education or employment. They're likely to end up spending a fair amount of their time on welfare. Some of them are likely to end up in the criminal justice system. They all end up probably costing us as taxpayers more than they're putting in. And we can't afford that if we want to then improve the school system, if we want to improve the health service, if we want to improve the roads that are falling apart. There's sort of fundamental meta story attached to that. And then there's the individual story of those kids who are lost and they're not engaged and they're struggling with the system. And even those that manage to get to university. I had a conversation just on Saturday with a very impressive young man who went to his local boys' comprehensive school in southeast London, got a place at Oxford, did really well at Oxford with an English degree, and he can't get a job. He's sending off all the applications, he's doing all the right things, but he doesn't even get a reply because everything's being processed algorithmically in terms of hiring. And I've just taken on someone in a similar position who got first from Cambridge in history. She's doing a master's here in LSE, can't get a job. So I'm giving her a little bit of work experience doing some work for me in Parliament so that she's got a bit of experience and then she can get a job. But this collapse in entry-level employment, even for those who do the right thing in the education system and go to the best universities in the world, means we've got a crisis that we're facing where the promise of study hard, do well in your tests, get to a great university, you'll then get a great job, is just falling apart. And we've got to do better.
And I think, that we've got to do better is a great, I think, sort of like point to just, sort of dwell on. And you obviously there is not a one silver bullet type, fix to this, right? This is, it feels to me sort of, it's pretty systemic in as much as that we have a system that's basically been designed, with an outcome that no longer meets the needs of the world, right? So you're kind of across this in all of the different ways that you've described in terms of your various roles, whether that's Nord Anglia in terms of academic excellence internationally or here in the UK. What do you see as being kind of the key things that we need to be focusing on to start to kind of overcome and realize the opportunity that we also still have? Because we, let's just be a bit glass half full about it for a second. There is also tremendous, hope and excitement about where we are somewhat in the world today.
Yeah. I was listening to the Rethink lectures recently, and Rick Bregman, who does those lectures, is a 4-part series, and he talks about you kind of got to start with misery in order to get to hope, because you've got to have your hope grounded in reality. So it's a fair question. Let's move on from how difficult it is to how we might be able to get to something better. Look, I think we need to have a mindset in education that's not that school exists in order to filter for universities, but school exists in order to prepare every young person to be a productive and engaged and valued member of society. And that needs to embrace their differences, and it needs to embrace different possible outcomes than just going to the best possible university. We can see in the United States the rise, if you like, of the tool belt generation, of a generation of young people who could go to college. They've got the grade point average to go to college, but they're choosing to go into more vocational skills instead. That's a rational response to a country where the graduate level of unemployment is higher than the general level of unemployment. And it's a rational response when you can see that you can earn good money, be held in esteem by your community, be adding value to the economy and to your family by doing applied work. And I think for too long, when I was schools minister from 2006, 2009, it was in the Tony Blair era of education, and of an aim of 50% going to university. So to an extent, I'm part of the problem of of fixating on that mindset, we can move away from that. I think technology provides some exciting opportunities to help us do that. I've been part of a conversation facilitated a little bit at the OECD, but with some people from Australia, from people from the UK, around university admissions. In the end, it's hard for schools to move away from where they are now for as long as parents' aspiration is for their kids to do well in exams, so they can pass the hurdles of university admission and at least have that option. Now, a university like Cambridge, they're struggling to differentiate between a lot of kids getting A stars in A levels. They need to be able to do better than the very flat two-dimensional paper certificate with a grade on it. Wouldn't it be better if we had a digital portfolio for them where they could drill into how a child's done within those exams and with the other things that they've done in school, the other achievements that are made on the sports field, in the theatre, in the concert hall, in whatever else that they're doing, so they can get a more rounded picture, and AI tools can help them with that, of the potential of individuals to be successful students at Cambridge. That same portfolio could also be used by employers to interrogate whether or not that person is likely to be a successful employee with the potential to develop and perhaps get over some of the entry-level employment problems where individual employers are rationally saying, well, I can use a machine to do what that entry-level job does. But they will realize very quickly, if they're not doing so already, that they're still going to have to hire some people to manage the machines. Now, what do I need to know about an individual to know whether or not they're worth developing to become that person? I think we can train humans augmented by AI to look into a portfolio of achievement for an individual and be able to do that. So we can then populate portfolios with a better range of qualifications, more project-based qualifications, not just memory recall and exams done in sports halls, and have a much richer opportunity for every individual because they can show off their whole self in both work and further study.
I love that. That concept of a portfolio that becomes your passport, right? I think that's a great answer to that kind of big question I asked you. Let's just go back a bit for a second. So as I said, you've got that unique kind of mix, I suppose, in the sense, you've worked inside government, you've been close to the realities of like change and implementation, and you've seen the constraint of, that policymakers face. What were some of the kind of most formative experiences in that sort of part of your journey, and those moments that shaped you? How did that sort of, I suppose, sort of teach you about kind of, because what you described there, we need to change, right? We need to change education. So what did that teach you about sort of what's hard and how you make that change in education that you sort of just described?
I think when you speak to most people who've held ministerial office, they would say, I'd be a much better minister now than I was then. And to an extent, you're just parachuted into this role. You're learning on the job. And it's quite hard. Good ministers do it, and they learn to do it, but it's quite hard to really question the assumptions behind policy when you're just sort of landed with it and you're implementing it and you're getting on with it. And I had some great learning about how the system works when I was a minister, and there were things I learned along the way. Eventually, that you didn't need to legislate in order to get things done. That you can influence in other ways, and not just through spending money, but by winning the argument with the profession. In the end, they will then do things.
Yeah.
But the bigger learning came afterwards, in a way, when I had time to reflect, when I had time to do things like watch Ken Robinson's brilliant TED Talk, when both of my children, my now adult children, had an experience where they each bailed out of a university course with the cost to them in terms of debt that didn't amount to anything. One of them went on to complete a degree, the others doing very successfully as an opera director and will also complete an OU degree this year. So it's not actually done them
Mm.
much harm.
Yeah.
Taking on the agency and saying, no, actually, this isn't working for me. I'm gonna stop and do something different. But that causes you to question and go, well, yeah, they were doing the right thing,
Mhm.
and yet it didn't work. Was that partly my bad as a parent that I didn't advise them well enough? Parents are very influential in the decisions and the choices that young people make when they go to university. Was university the right thing for them? Turned out it wasn't at the time for my daughter, the opera director. So that causes you to think about things differently. And then when I've been involved more commercially, when I've been involved with more charitable stuff, I can see much more of a bigger picture. And I then went on to be employment minister after our schools minister. I also therefore
Wow.
engage a lot in labour market stuff and see this disconnect between the world of work and the world of education. One is obsessed by qualification outcomes, the other's obsessed by job outcomes, and the two don't necessarily meet because qualifications don't necessarily give you a job. And you've got to fundamentally question what we're doing if we haven't joined the dots. So because that just disrupts people's lives.
It's sparking off so many interesting thoughts for me. I mean, one to speak to specifically is Dubai.
Yeah.
This kind of, I suppose, sort of center of innovation and pace and dynamism that both you and I have had some experience of working with. They merged their Department of Education and Tourism to, as I suppose,
Yeah.
as a direct kind of, I suppose, example of what you were just describing there about those two sort of silos, right?
Yeah. And I think in the Middle East, where incidentally, in particular, I observe some really smart women taking a bigger leadership role in policy and in the agencies that are driving this. The regulator of KHDA in Dubai is an extremely impressive woman. Some of the women that I've been talking to in Bahrain, even in Saudi, doing really interesting work in joining the dots. I'll be in Saudi in May at their Human Capability Initiative conference, where they are explicitly saying we've got to have a seamless relationship between what we're doing in the labour market, what we're doing in skills development, what we're doing in talent development and knowledge development in schools. And we don't have that in the West as clearly because we've got legacy systems
Yeah.
that have been built up differently. I'm very pleased in this country we now have moved the skills minister into the Department for Work and Pensions so that we can join up
How
those
interesting.
employment programs with skills. Jackie remains also in the Department for Education as the Higher Education Minister, and for as long as she's in post, I'm hopeful that we can then join up the two departments and get them working well together. But so that's the beginnings of something similar here, but it's harder to see than we see it in the Middle East.
And that sort of going back, I suppose, in a sense, to the system and the change. If you were advising government now and you could sort of influence the next wave of reform, what would be your two sort of top kind of priorities?
I think it's become a real priority for me that I've been thinking about lately, that we're really wedded to a model in education that's around standardization. Standardized tests, a standardized approach to how we train teachers, how they deliver in the classroom, what pedagogy they use, etc. It's a model that's pervasive. And yet, as I said earlier, we've got all of this difference. And so there is an opportunity, I think, for us to hyper-differentiate, to really start to personalize the experience for individuals, help them make better choices about what curricula they want to study, what qualifications they want to go for, the pace at which they work. We're living longer. I mean, one of the other things I've been thinking about is the implications of a 100-year life to education. And if we're going to be having 50-year working lives, we're going to have multiple careers because we're in an environment where technology is going to de-skill us consistently, where we need to be able to reskill consistently. So we need technology platforms to help us with our retraining and be good at self-directed learning and love our learning. So we've got a bit of time, and so if for some individuals they need a bit more time in order to get to where they want to in terms of their qualification, can we not flex the system to be able to do that rather than it being the sausage machine that school feels like to so many people? So I would want policy to question those standardized approaches to exams, to time, to qualifications, to destinations, and say, let's look much more at the individual and how we can develop every individual to be able to make a meaningful contribution to their community, to their family, to their lives.
I mean, two pieces of policy that have come out of the UK, and it's honestly great to be able to talk about positive things coming out of this country again. In some ways, leading the way. Degree awarding powers. The lifelong learning entitlement, which maybe speaks to the point you make. Love to get your kind of perspectives on that. What impact that's having and where you think that's going to go.
Yeah, the degree apprenticeship is a positive thing that we're doing. My nephew's doing one for AstraZeneca, really loving it. It's ridiculously well paid for a 19-year-old who's doing a degree.
That's a great tip for anyone listening, by the way.
It slightly befuddles me. But, for those that can get on those, and we need more of them, there are great opportunities for employers to develop talent younger and bring them on. They're a great opportunity for the individual. I worry that they're disproportionately being taken up by people of advantage.
Right.
So we've got more work to do to develop that. But using some of that apprenticeship levy for some of that, I think, is really positive, and having a clearer pathway into those. Quite a lot of the innovation in that are then driven by private sector apprenticeship providers, people like BPP, people like Metaverse, etc. And some of those getting degree awarding powers. BPP has degree awarding powers, for example. I think that's interesting, that we're even if our traditional higher education providers are not that innovative, and I don't think they are, and they need to change quite quickly because there's a bit of a burning platform, but we're starting to see some provision here that is more innovative and more exciting, and learning a little bit from some of the good practice in some parts of the higher education world in the United States, where Arizona State or Southern New Hampshire are really interesting providers. So, there are some good things about that. The lifelong learning entitlement and reframing the apprenticeship levy to a growth and skills levy and making it potentially more flexible for employers is then an opportunity to bring some more resource to bear. The individual has their lifelong learning entitlement that they can use to pay for modularized learning throughout their working life. The growth and skills levy becomes a more flexible pot of money for employers to be able to make that contribution, so we can then start to develop the talent that employers need and to develop people's talent in the way the individual needs. That's a great opportunity. I hope that the government manages to land that successfully. We'll have to wait and see. Fingers crossed. And those are good innovations for us here in England, which I think others do want to learn from and are excited by.
I think one area that I'd love to kind of get more sort of your view on in terms of the solution, I suppose, in a sense, is you made the reference about sort of kind of exclusivity and sort of those with means, and you talked about those that are not in employment, education, and training. How do we really close that gap? What's actually going to kind of move the needle?
Yeah, that gap's been persistent.
Yeah.
And, in a way, when the coalition government took over from the government that I was in 2010, they kind of magnified what was the established wisdom as to how to do the best for the most children in schools with the knowledge-rich curriculum and really sort of driving a particular way of doing things. And that was, to be fair to them, driven by a sense that not enough disadvantaged kids are getting into the best universities and getting that opportunity. And so we will focus schools on those subjects that the Russell Group, the top universities crave, and get more of those disadvantaged kids into universities. But it hasn't worked in terms of narrowing the gap. Some things about it have worked, but in terms of helping disadvantaged kids, yes, lots of individuals might have done well, but the gap still
and compounded by COVID as well, right?
Yeah, and COVID was a disaster for most of those kids. So, what do we do about that? Well, look, I've talked about a more personalised approach, more relevance, more flexibility. I think we do need to respect vocational routes more. And we've had a curriculum and assessment review here in England. The Department for Education is busy writing the specifications for a new curriculum. We'll see what the accountability system does. But the Prime Minister's intent, and he feels this personally. He, up until the age of 18, he was in the top bunk in a bedroom with his brother who had special educational needs and had a very different experience of education and of a working life that then followed. And so Keir has a passion around skills and FE, which is very unusual to find in Prime Ministers. And he wants more breadth in the curriculum and more of a range of opportunities and experience for people without diminishing ambition around standards, but we can be and should be as ambitious for people's performance in applied learning as they are in theoretical learning. And that's the new balance that we've got to find.
Right.
And then I think we will provide something that can work for pretty much everyone. We'll have to make discrete provision for a small number who've got very profound special educational needs and disabilities. But we still need a system that celebrates their achievements. And at the moment, I'm afraid we don't. We're fixated on a certain performance standard and that's it. And then I think we can narrow those gaps because we start to respect the routes that take people into the skills that the economy needs, frankly. We're massively short of electrical engineers. If we're going to build wind turbines, if we're going to put heat pumps in our homes, we need people who can do that work. And the average age of an electrical engineer in this country is 55.
That's a really great sort of segue into my next kind of question, really. And we've sort of touched on some of the themes and like the scaffolding that's going to be around this modern curriculum. But let's zero in on that sort of last point you made around kind of future skills. We need to be, preparing young people, not for the world that we grew up in, but for the world that we think's coming, right? And so when you look at that with all of your perspective, what does a modern curriculum really need to include in terms of skills?
I think there are some core competencies that we need to ensure that everyone is confident with. So some of them are perennial. You've got to be good at reading and writing and speaking and listening, and those numeracy skills are fundamental. And alongside numeracy goes problem solving. There's a lot of problem solving in maths. So those are there. Critical thinking. Fundamental, so that we, with all of the content that we all now consume, we can start to differentiate and just question the validity of some of the nonsense that we get fed. But that critical thinking then also becomes really helpful in building the curiosity that is valued in the labour market. We're seeing in the labour market people
valuing not STEM on its own. It used to be the answer to your question would have been STEM skills, really, really important. And I chair STEM learning. I think those are important. But the labour market values STEM with creativity. Why do they do that? Because they want people who are questioning, imaginative, innovative in their thinking, because they can get pure STEM to an extent from machines. They want imagination. They want people who can think laterally, who can join up with other disciplines in ways that the technology finds much harder to do. To an extent, those that can think illogically as well as logically. So those creative subjects are also really important, and they've been largely abandoned in the current accountability system, and that's opening up again now. So there's a creativity, critical thinking, communication, digitally literate, AI literate, media literate.
I mean, as someone who's chairing STEM, I mean, maybe it's time to rethink the name. I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? How fast we've moved, I guess, in terms of a recognition of that, as you said, those pillars that we thought of were fundamental have been massively challenged. Really in such a small amount of time, and I think what you just outlined there, I think is a great list, and I think I'm sort of I'm very much kind of converted to that. You talked earlier about sort of upskilling and reskilling and us all being, I suppose, in a sense, on this lifelong learning journey. So, like, what skills do we need to kind of thrive in that kind of context?
We need to be good learners.
Right. Taught how to learn.
One of the things that really bothers me is the possibility that we'll see 40-something, 50-somethings who significant parts of their job start to be done by machines. And they, in the end, feel and possibly become redundant in the labour market and feel like, well, it's too late for me now. I'm on the scrap heap. If you're 40-something, if you're 50-something, you've still got 20, 30 years productive working life ahead of you. We don't have a model of pensions, which means that everyone can retire at 50, at 60, probably at 70, because we're now living to 90, 100. So people have got to remain productive, which means they've got to remain hopeful, which means that when something comes along and is frankly doing a better job than they can do and doing it much quicker, then they need help. And some tech tools will be able to help them, and some people will be able to help them actually, I'm 60% of the way of being that thing, and I'm 70% of the way to being that thing. And if I did that bit of learning with my lifelong learning entitlement, then I could viably apply to do that thing, and that gives me a further future. But that I do have to have the belief in myself as a learner, even when I'm 50, that I can go and learn some new tricks. And that's a bit of a mindset shift, because I think people get fairly set in their identity as an accountant, as a legal professional, as whatever they are, but they can do new tricks. Humans are fantastic learning machines. They're born learning, literally. When you come out of the womb, you're there observing and quickly learning to speak, learning to move, learning to imitate whatever you see. We are learning machines, and we can carry on learning right the way to our graves. And we need to do that, and we need to be confident to do that.
I also think it's really interesting to think about the fact that sort of, using your analogy, I suppose, in terms of, when you wish you had known what you knew now about being a minister, how can we tap into that more senior generation who perhaps have that sort of different perspective and wisdom that could be applied to, those not in employment, educational training, or the next generation? Because I feel that's an untapped, I feel, kind of, I suppose, sort of like portion of the workforce. And I don't think we're really capitalizing on that at the moment.
Yeah, in policy, that's what the House of Lords is supposed to be. And it frustrates me at times that we don't get listened to a little bit more than we are by governments of whatever persuasion. But beyond that, more seriously, there's a lot to be said for intergenerational learning. There might be new generations coming into the labour market where they've got a lot to offer in terms of understanding their world. A couple of years ago, when I was out at Google seeing the CTO of Google, he said that when they're doing their product work, they focus on what young people are doing, because what young people are doing is what the rest of us will be doing in a few years' time. And young people, what they're having to learn now, what my 14-year-old is learning, feels much more advanced than what I was learning at that age. So they've got loads to offer, but they might not have the experience, and they won't have the experience of how to get up on time, how to get themselves presentable, how to behave culturally at work, how to hold down a job, how to manage the office politics, how to just do all of those things that you learn through experience, and to be mentored by people who can help them do that. Now, some of those people will also have other real skills. And the master apprenticeship model has existed in skills development since the beginning of time, and we can lean into that, but we can lean into that in such a way that we have some reverse mentoring too. So those older workers need to become more digitally competent. They need to understand the way younger generation works. They need to understand how some of these new tools work, and then the young people can learn from some of the established norms that the older people understand.
I mean, what a great two-way street that is. And I'm just imagining what that could look like in terms of future policy or a new tech platform. And talking of tech, I mean, we touched on it a little bit already, obviously, and I think it's time to kind of get a bit more under the bonnet, in the weeds a bit on it. So this is a very big question, and I apologize for it. But what's the real opportunity for AI in education?
It's an exciting opportunity to augment what teachers can do. Clearly and upfront, it's not there to replace teachers, but it can augment them. There's a lot of chat about what it can do with tutoring, and there's some great analysis that Daisy Christodoulou has done. Her No More Marking Substack is really worth following for those who are interested in this. And there are some things, if designed well, Gen AI can do pretty good tutoring. Designed well, fed with the right data sources, traditional machine learning-based AI can do some really good tutoring too. And that can help with the individual knowledge acquisition that still remains an important part of learning, and potentially can then release school time to be a much more human endeavor, much richer in terms of the social aspect of learning. If you've done outside of school as homework, some of the more isolated, individualized one-to-one tutoring online, with some of those tools, there's a vision there about then applying that learning through projects, through group-based learning, through a different sort of learning experience to what we have in schools at the moment. That's quite hard to teach. So you then need teachers who can understand not only how well individuals are doing with that instructional element that they're doing online, but understand some of the wider context of children's lives and what's going on in their lives, so as individuals, so that they can then tailor what they're doing in that human work and match people together, again augmented by the AI, more acutely. And achieve more success for individuals. And the AI can restructure the timetable. It can restructure who is teaching who according to what's going to work better. That's exciting in a more flexible model of schooling. We're seeing the growth of online schooling to help those for whom just the whole experience of going to school is a challenge. There's an excitement attached to that too. A lot of people accuse accuse assessment of being the tail that wags the dog in schools. And we can do assessment differently. I'm ambitious for assessment organisations to chase after um, AI helping with vivas.
Right.
A viva, an oral presentation of what you know and understand, is one of the oldest forms of assessment known to humankind.
Hmm.
But it's really expensive because you're relying on an expert human on a one-to-one basis,
Yeah.
being able to make a judgment. Now, AI can observe body language. It can understand audio. It can analyze audio. It can compare it to other sources. It can do a lot to give a judgment that then a human can then check in on and
Yeah.
make sure that they, and look at any outliers on it. I think there's plenty of possibility around that. That's a really exciting opportunity because what you can then start to assess is the learning that people have derived out of group-based learning, out of project-based learning, in a much more accurate and to do it at scale, and move us on from everything being about examinations in large sports halls in a standardised way that doesn't serve quite a few people.
Right now there's more philanthropic wealth in the world than at any point in the world's history. Whether you're going to a government or whether you're going to one of those philanthropists or a group of them, what's that one innovation that you'd love to see just, to your point, rolled out at scale in education today?
I think the thing that would make the biggest difference is getting that portfolio that I talked about earlier right.
Yeah.
So for policy, or it doesn't have to be governments that decide this. This could be universities and schools come together and work out
And
a set of
employers,
standards.
maybe.
And employers.
Yep.
Work out what needs to be in that portfolio, some standard in interoperability, API type stuff, and then the market can build those tools once they're to a consistent standard that the big universities and employers around the world recognize, and then everyone would fit in around that. That's a project that needs funding, but it could fundamentally change the motivations behind the way education works.
I think Davos is on right now. I think we should jump on a plane and get there.
Yeah. Go on then. Get one of your philanthropy friends to fund us. We'll be off.
So looking forward for a moment, again, it's a very big question, but just love your kind of instinctive kind of perspective on it. What trends do you think are really going to define education skills over the next 3 to 5 years?
Over that period...
Or is that too short a timeline? I don't know. The world's moving so fast.
It's
really hard to say.
Fast. Look, I think in that period we will see an increasing amount of noise around the collapse of entry-level employment, around perhaps at the other end of the labour market, older workers dropping out of the labour market and the cost to the welfare state of that. So more older people on welfare, that being unsustainable, and there being an urgency around getting the skills system right and increasing productivity and making sure then, in this country anyway, that the lifelong learning entitlement and the growth and skills levy are rolled out and are fit for purpose and are working well. I think there's then, related to that, higher education and wider tertiary education, FE as well, embracing modularity more so that people are cycling in and out of going into those institutions through their working lives and not front-ending their working life with a whole bunch of debt and a 3 or 4 year degree, but that eking out over a longer period of time. And then a school system that then becomes more aligned around both university skills and wider employment skills, so that we're then equipping people to enter into that system.
And how are you advising leaders, policymakers, the businesses and organisations you're involved with, to prepare for that future?
I think it is to say to employers, your rational decisions to invest in capital rather than labour at entry level, think about how those will play out for you when you don't have anyone left to manage the machines, and adjust some of your hiring accordingly. Because if everyone does what you're doing, you're going to be in trouble. And the wider economy is frankly going to be in trouble, and there won't be any consumers to buy your product. To universities, it's a burning platform. You're going to have to change. You're going to have to align better with employment need as well as your own academic need. And you're going to have to work better with further education and colleges and private training providers. And to school leaders, look, I know change is uncomfortable, but you, during COVID, showed that you were capable of adapting really quickly. And this change needs to be quick.
Yeah.
And it needs to be more radical than government is saying it is. And to government, there's a revolution coming, and be ready for it.
I love that. I love that agency point. Oh, gosh, I could talk to you all day, but I know how busy you are. So I'm going to close it with just a short sort of quick fire kind of round of questions, Jim, if that's okay. So first thing that comes into your head, if you could instantly download one skill into your brain, what would it be?
I think it would be being able to myself read boring stuff more readily, more quickly, and embrace the struggle of that, because that is when I learn, and I shouldn't offload that to AI.
That's a really good answer. It's a modern answer as well. I like that. Who's the one thinker or leader, and they can be alive or dead, that you'd love to invite to redesign education with you?
Well, the person I've been listening to most recently was the person who did the Reith lectures, Rutger Bregman, a Dutch historian, and I thought his sweep of analysis of what's going wrong in the world and his message that this is a moral crusade, and specifically on education, that we are nurturing all of this talent that is wasted in private equity, in merchant banking, in management consulting, with no moral purpose whatsoever. Let's design something that nurtures moral purpose, that nurtures respect for democracy, respect for each other, love of humanity, and humanity being able to flourish. So I'd go with him for now, because he's on my mind.
And if there was one outdated rule or norm in education that you could delete overnight, what would it be?
That the only way to teach is on a standardised basis.
And lastly, this is more of a personal one. If teleportation became real, where would you go first and why?
Oh, that's an exciting opportunity. I'd probably go to Greenland, which sounds a weirdly political answer. But the reason why Greenland is suddenly is top of the news and is being contested is because of the melting of the ice caps, and the opportunity to go and see what lies beneath, what's been buried for eons, literally. I love nature. I love charismatic landscapes, big landscapes. And I quite enjoy, I'm lucky enough to have a place in Orkney, so I'm not afraid of the cold. And I'd love to do that and immerse myself in a landscape that is uncovering for the first time.
Jim, this has been a brilliant conversation, although too short for me. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. It's been great.
And if listeners want to follow your work and keep up with what you're doing, where's the best place to find you?
The only social media I do stuff on is LinkedIn, and I try and do a bit on there.
Lovely. Well, thank you again. It's been brilliant having you on.
Great. Thank you very much, Justin.